This will be the first in a series of a verse-by-verse study through the book of Daniel. Most Christian colleges, if they have Revelation in the curriculum, they usually want the students to study Daniel first, and then they go to Revelation, which is a good pattern because the book of Daniel parallels the book of Revelation, in that both of them contain many, many prophecies, even though all of the prophets contain prophecies. The name Daniel and its abbreviated form, Dan, reveals, I do believe, a subtle difference between truth and error. Okay, Daniel. The EL on the end would be the abbreviated form of Elohim, or God. So you have Daniel, Michael, Gabriel. But Daniel means God is my judge. But if you drop the IEL, just plain old Dan, that means to judge. Okay, so you're discrediting or removing God. And it's interesting to me in Genesis 49:16, when Jacob, or Israel at the time, named Israel, gave some prophecies about the tribes, his sons, of the last days. He says this about Dan, the abbreviated one. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path that biteth the horse heels, so that his rider shall fall backward. Now that's not a good prophecy of Dan, but yet Daniel himself, the man Daniel, was greatly blessed of God, and he was told that he was greatly beloved in heaven. And Daniel, I guess, could be the only person said the two great angels, Michael and Gabriel, made an appearance to him. I mean, he has a lot on the plus side, and Dan has much on the negative side. What's interesting about the tribe of Dan, they are the first tribe that went into apostasy in Judges 17 and 18, where the tribe of Dan had a priest that they called father. And they were right next to Zidon. Zidon would be the location for Jezebel and her priest and prophets, and they had, vestments. And it's also interesting in the tribe of Dan, in Exodus 31:6, there were two tribes that were hired, I guess you could say, to build the first Jewish temple or tabernacle, actually the tabernacle. And so you have in Exodus 31, the tribe of Dan is one of them, and the other tribe was the tribe of Judah. So Judah would be the tribe of the lineage of Jesus, and then the tribe of Dan was the other one. What I find interesting about that is that this structure is built in a way to draw, I suppose, spiritual energy to the people of Israel. And the perverted aspect of this would lead into, Solomon, the Star of Solomon that you'll see on the Israeli flag is actually the Star of Solomon, and into the Masons, the Freemasons, where they know that you could build a building to draw negative electromagnetism, to draw spirits. And I would say that the Jewish tabernacle built in a certain way would be electromagnetism that would be associated with the Spirit of God. But just see how subtle that is. Just by removing a few letters from a word can go from God is my judge to judge. Meaning, like the last verse in Judges, where every man did that which was right in his own eyes. But what's also interesting about the tribe of Dan is when you get into the New Testament, when you see the 12 tribes mentioned in Revelation, Dan's missing. Dan's missing and Ephraim is missing. So those two tribes are missing from the 12, replaced by Levi and Joseph. So this tribe of Dan in Judges 17:18 was the first one to go into apostasy. But yet in the book of Daniel, God is my judge, this man was greatly blessed. And he, of course, had great trials. Daniel was he was a Jewish child of royalty, and his captivity fulfilled the prophecy that Isaiah gave to Hezekiah for his foolishness. Daniel became a captive in Babylon during the reign of Jehoiakim. If you go to the end of Jeremiah 52, he records the three times that Nebuchadnezzar, and sometimes he will spell it with the R, Nebuchadrezzar. No problem. It's no difference between John and Jonathan, or Johnny or John Boy or anything like that, or so forth and so on. But Nebuchadnezzar surrounded Jerusalem for 18 months. And it's a small city, so it wasn't difficult to do. Just put your army around. Anybody comes out, you either take them captive or kill them. And you don't let anybody go in. And obviously what's going to happen in 18 months, they're going to run out of food, and which is what they did. And Jeremiah was in the city, and Daniel was in the city. And Jeremiah warned the king, and he told him what to do. And the king was so afraid of CNN and MSNBC that he didn't listen to this lowly renegade Jeremiah, that nobody listened to him. And then he ended up in a terrible position where he was caught trying to run away, fleeing to NORAD when trouble took place, in a mountain of Colorado Springs. And Nebuchadnezzar and his army captured the guy and killed his sons in front of him and poked his eyes out right after that. So the last thing he saw was the brutal murder of his sons, because he feared public opinion from CNN, ABC, NBC, and so forth and so on, and failed to listen to one lowly, radical prophet, Jeremiah. Now, Jeremiah, being he was in the city, recorded the destruction of Jerusalem, and he wrote about it in Lamentations. And historically, that's his firsthand account. But doctrinally, it will be an account of the Jews being destroyed in the Jewish temple during the tribulation time period. In the first military campaign, Nebuchadnezzar ordered the removal of 3,023 Jewish people, and Daniel and his three buddies were in that group. So that's when he took the royal children, the royal seed, and then he's going to bring them to Babylon to indoctrinate them into the culture of Babylon and believing in the moon god, Allah, even though that name wasn't at that time. In the second military campaign, you'll see in Jeremiah 52:29, 832 persons were taken captive, and that's when Ezekiel would have been of that group. And then the third installment, they took, 745 persons. Could have been 746 because the fella asked Jeremiah what he wanted to do, and Jeremiah decided, I'm going to stay in Jerusalem and suffer with the people. And bringing the total captives over to Babylon were 4,600. So those are the ones who were brought into the Babylonian culture to use them in the kingdom of Babylon, but again, to try to get them to forget their Jewish roots. And so that's what Daniel experienced. Can you imagine the tragic turmoil that he went through? But this was recorded in Isaiah 39. Hezekiah, after he was given 15 extra years to live, foolishly allowed some foreign ambassadors from Babylon to see his wealth. And you'll see this in Isaiah chapter 39. It's only got 8 verses, so it's easy read, quick read. And Isaiah told him, how dumb was that? Because in James 4, he records, from whence come wars and fightings among you, come they not hence, even of your lusts that war against your members. Ye lust and have not, ye kill and desire to have and cannot obtain. Ye fight and war, yet ye have not because ye ask not. So the idea of war is some king wants something that doesn't belong to him, and so he sends his soldiers to go get it. This is what the neocons, and all those, what they did, Cheney, Bush, and all that in the Middle East. But that's a whole other topic. Now, what Hezekiah did is he allowed these foreign ambassadors to see his wealth, which is what caused them to covet it, and that's why Nebuchadnezzar came. And Isaiah told Hezekiah, hear the word of the Lord of hosts. Behold, the days come that all that is in thine house and that which thy fathers have laid up in store unto this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, saith the Lord. And thy sons that issue from thee, which thou shalt beget, shall they take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. Okay, that's Daniel. Isaiah really prophesied there. How did he know they were going to, castrate him? Well, and then Hezekiah, you see kind of what a selfish individual he became. And he said, good is the word of the Lord which thou hast spoken. He said, moreover, for there shall be peace and truth in my days. Well, what about your kids and grandkids and great-grandkids? Well, Daniel's the one that suffered from that. But Daniel also, because of his great sufferings, became a great pearl in God's eyes. So Daniel and his 3 friends were trained by the Babylonian instructors to indoctrinate them in centers of indoctrination, commonly called as the public schools of their day. And they were trying to indoctrinate them into the culture and religion of Babylon. But Daniel, as a teenager, most likely teenager, purposed in his heart and life to be pure from the worldly ways of Babylon. Oh man, that's something. That's an amazing thing. And then he had his 3 buddies, companions, who attempted the same. Now God amazingly used Daniel over 70 years as a prophet to 2 kings of 2 worldwide empires, Babylon and Media Persia. And his contemporary, Jeremiah, would have been the older contemporary. Ezekiel would have about his same age. And then Ezra would have been younger, where he crossed all those years. And since I mentioned that the book of Daniel parallels the book of Revelation, both books record prophecies of the end times. And that's why they parallel, which will complete the times of what is known as the Gentiles. You'll see this in Luke 21, verse 24, where it reads, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword and shall be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And of course, that's what Revelation records. Then also this is mentioned in Romans chapter 11, in verse 25, where it says, for I would not, brethren, that ye should be ignorant of this mystery. So this is one of the 7 major mysteries, and it's also one of the 7 areas or topics we are not to ignore. He says, lest ye be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part has happened to Israel. Okay, so that would be during the church time period, and as far as the beginning of the tribulation. And then it says, until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. And then, of course, Israel, well, in verse 28, it says, as concerning the gospel, they are enemies for your sakes, but as touching the election, they are beloved for the Father's sake. And so Daniel is quite a character, greatly blessed of God, greatly beloved, as mentioned by Gabriel in Daniel chapter 10. Great trial, but he became quite a testimony for the Lord. And these prophecies that are recorded in Daniel and Revelation, plus all the other prophecies by the other prophets, reveals the power of God, where man can, Satan can prophesy in a way, but he cannot prophesy to the details of God without overriding the free will of man. In Isaiah 41, the Lord brought man into a challenge, showing up the United Nations, and then he, takes on these smart alecks. In Isaiah 41, he says to them, verse 21, "Produce your cause, saith the Lord. Bring forth your strong reason, saith the King of Jacob." Oh boy, that's a political statement. That would sure get them riled in the usual nonsense of the UN. He says, "Let them bring them forth and show us what shall happen. Let them show the former things what they be, that we may consider, we, the Godhead, and know the latter end of them, and declare us things for to come. Show the things that are to come hereafter, that we may know that ye are gods. Yea, do good, do evil, that we may be dismayed, and behold it together. Behold, ye are of nothing, and your work of naught, and abomination is he that chooseth you." Boy, is that not a smack in the face. I mean, that's the Lord putting it on the United Nations and company. Now, how does the Lord, as he puts his predictions in writing, how does the Lord fulfill this? And how does the devil fulfill these things? Well, yes, both of them can give man thoughts. And what the Lord does is he makes a statement of prophecy, and then he uses man to fulfill these prophecies. But these men could be good, could be bad, could be demoniacs. But they will act upon a thought thinking it's their thought when it's actually God's thought. And you'll see this in Revelation 17:17, for he says, "For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will." Their hearts would be the 10 demoniac kings, to fulfill his will and to agree, and to give their kingdom unto the beast until the words of God shall be fulfilled. Now, I don't believe these 10 demoniac kings in their daily devotions got up in the morning together and in their Bible study said, "We need to fulfill the will of God, and let's give our kingdoms to the Antichrist." No, they all had the same thoughts. These thoughts came from God. They all thought, "Oh, that's a good idea. That's okay. How about we'll do that for a time being, and we're going to get wealthy anyway, and we'll get control over people." And this is the intent of God. Now, the devil can also do something like this. In John 13, verse 2, it mentions, "And supper being ended, the devil having now put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him." Satan can put thoughts in our minds too. And here he put a thought in Judas Iscariot's mind to betray Jesus Christ. Now, the difference between Satan's thoughts and God's thoughts is that both can give us thoughts, but God can read our mind to see what we're going to do with the thought, where the devil can't read our mind. And if you bring this up to Christians and actually ask them, "Do you think possibly you got that idea from the devil?" People will get Christians, "How dare you say? Are you saying that I'm possessed?" No, I'm not saying you're possessed. I'm just saying that you can get your thoughts from Satan. "How dare you say something like that? I'm so holy. I'm so godly." Well, in Matthew 16, Jesus asked the apostles, "Whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" And so they start some say you're John the Baptist, some say you're Elias, some say you're Jeremiah, some say you're like Amos. And none of them say you're like Andy, Amos and Andy. And so they're saying that, and then he said, "But whom say ye that I am?" And then Peter, the spokesman, said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And then the Lord said, Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it to thee, but my Father which is in heaven. In other words, Simon Peter, you just spoke by the inspiration of God. You got that thought from God, and you believed it, and you agree with it, and you're right. Well, as you keep reading, in verse 21, there is a paragraph mark, so I don't know if it's just 5 minutes apart, but in the text, it's real close together. In verse 21, Jesus said, hey, I'm going to Jerusalem. I'm going to suffer many things. I'm going to be killed by the chief priests, scribes, and I'm going to rise again the third day. And Peter didn't agree with that. The man who just agreed with the Father. And he didn't agree with that, and he rebuked the Lord Jesus. Be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be unto thee. And then the Lord said, Get thee behind me, Satan, for thou art an offense. Now, how quick can that turn? Yes, that can happen in any and all of us. That quick. Because spirits are actually words with wings. And it can come right through us. And we think the thought. Have you ever been driving along with somebody and you had a thought and you verbalized a thought and then the other party said, I was just thinking about the same thing. That's because the words with wings came through. You both got it connected. One verbalized it, and the other thought it. And the Lord can do this to one individual, to hundreds of individuals, to an entire army like he did in the Old Testament. But yet it's the individual who thinks that has the thought, and when they agree with the thought, they think it's their own original thought. But this is the power of God where he can give his prophecies, write them down, and then they become true. That's the amazing power of God, without contradicting the free will of man. Now, in this book of Daniel, Daniel's humble mind and believing heart qualified him to receive the understanding of many dreams and visions that were revealed to him and others. And dreams and visions, according to Numbers 12:6, is the method that God chooses to make his words known before written revelation. And he gave Daniel a bunch of them. Daniel typifies the Holy Ghost as the true interpreter of the Word of God. Joseph typifies Jesus Christ. Both men, had a gold chain put around their neck and clothed in scarlet, and interpreted a dream or a vision. Daniel had, there are 5 visions in the book of Daniel, and they describe worldwide kings and kingdoms as beast of prey, until the final beast, the Antichrist, recorded in Revelation 13. And these supernatural prophecies fill in the historical gap between Malachi and Matthew, but then they also have a dual application into the second coming of Christ. In these 5 visions, the first one had 4 worldwide kingdoms, and then the 5th was the Antichrist. The next vision had 3 worldwide kingdoms, and then the last one, the 4th, was the Antichrist. The next vision had 2 worldwide kingdoms, and then he mentioned the Antichrist. In Daniel 9, he had 1 worldwide kingdom, and then he mentioned the Antichrist. In Daniel 11, he just doctrinally writes about the Antichrist. Now, if you look at Daniel practically, and there are some truths in the Bible which are universal, throughout ages, dispensations, universal over Gentiles, Jews, in the Church of God. But then there are some truths that are time-specific, or specific toward an individual or a race of people. But when you look at Daniel practically, it reveals the practical wisdom of the book, reveals the fallacies of worldly wisdom versus the glory of righteous wisdom. And in James chapter 3, verse 15 and 16, he parallels the difference between worldly wisdom and godly wisdom. In James chapter 3, if you pick it up about verse 13 and following, in 13 it says, "Who is a wise man endued with knowledge among you? Let him show out of a good conversation his works with meekness of wisdom." Now that meekness of wisdom is most definitely not the world's wisdom. Okay, and then he contrasts these. Okay, one has bitter envying and strife in your hearts. Okay, and this is the devilish wisdom in verse 15. This wisdom descendeth not from above, but is earthly, sensual, devilish, envying, strife, confusion, and every evil work. Okay, that would be the state schools, the controlled centers of indoctrination. That's the false science. That's the pseudoscience. Daniel understood true science, where the false science would be the worldly wisdom or knowledge. The wisdom that's from above is verse 17. It's pure, peaceable, gentle, easy to be entreated. Oh, easy to be entreated. Can you imagine a college professor with a bunch of tenure actually considering intelligent design and writing about it? Ooh, boy, he will lose his tenure and his reputation. Wisdom from above is easy to be entreated. You could ask them questions, and they won't say, well, you're an idiot, you're a dumb fool. That's a dumb question. They won't arrogantly throw it in your face. Easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality, without hypocrisy, as you find in the pseudosciences, science falsely so-called. And the end result of godly wisdom will be the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of them that make peace. So practically, Daniel reveals these fallacies back and forth between worldly knowledge or worldly wisdom versus the godly and glory of righteous wisdom. The scholars of Chaldea believed the world kingdoms were evolving better and better until world peace. When Daniel reveals in Daniel 7:17 that the worldly kings and kingdoms will operate under the law of the jungle, and they will get worse and worse, and as Jesus said in Matthew 11:12, that the kingdoms of this world operate by violence. These wicked beasts will degenerate into iron-fisted tyrants as the Antichrist. And Daniel and Revelation reveal the only hope for the downward slide or the devolution of this world is the glorious second coming of the Lord Jesus Christ, when he will receive all the world kingdoms and then establish the 1,000-year reign of Christ, the beautiful utopia that is revealed by many of the prophets. This book of Daniel has 12 chapters, 357 verses, and at the end it is sealed up until the end. And then Revelation is the unsealing of it, because Revelation writes about the end. The end of what? Well, the calendar system is recorded in Daniel 9, the 70 weeks. It will be the end of the 70-week prophecy of Daniel.